NAMM 2020. I'm here with Dan. I'm honored to talk with one of the developers of the Wavestate, so of the RD California. How are you, Dan?
I'm happy to speak with you today. It's been a great show for us. So,
You have released for NAMM 2020 a big synthesizer, something people doesn't expect from you, because many of them expected a monologue XD or a new big analog polysynth, but not a Wavestation 2.0, so a Wavestate. Um, can you speak about when this deal started? Where come this idea to make again a Wavestate style synthesizer?
well, we first started working on Wave Sequencing 2.0 about 2.5 years ago, and at that point, we didn't have this particular form factor in mind. We just knew that we wanted to do something new with wave sequencing, and we had this neat idea for breaking apart the sequence into lanes and trying to do something new and exciting with it. So that was about 2.5 years ago, and then about 1.5 years ago, things solidified into the wave state that you see now.
What was the primary target with wave sequencing 2.0? So what was on your list to make better than the wave station?
Well, two main things. We wanted to do something that was non-repetitive, that could be organic and exciting and unexpected. And we also wanted to make it easier to use, more accessible to casual users, as opposed to the Wave Station. It's a great synth, you can do lots with it, but it was a little bit like a spreadsheet to edit it, and so we wanted to make it something more physical and immediate.
Can you speak a bit about your development team? Is it a big team which is behind this synthesizer, or do you have created already many, I think the Kronos and some other stuff from Korg? So can you give me a little overview of it?
Yeah, well, with the Kronos, for instance, we collaborated with a large team at Korg Inc. And so there were software developers on their side doing things like the sequencer and Karma and user interface things, and my group did more the synthesizers for it and some of the user interfaces for the synthesizers, the later ones. With this one, it's the software is all Korg R&D in California, and that's a pretty small group, just a handful of programmers. And we collaborated with Korg Inc. in terms of the physical design. So we had an idea for the layout, but they have brilliant industrial designers who made it this gorgeous thing that you see here, and mechanical engineers who figured out how to do the case, and electronic engineers who worked on the insides of the unit. So that was basically the collaboration. The hardware was mostly Korg Inc. The software was all Korg USA or Korg R&D in California.
And from the design point, because the Wavestate is a kind of wave station, but we don't talk about it. It can be a wave station, but it's more. It's a new synthesizer. How do you develop it further? This wave sequencing engine. So what was on the list? Say, I want to have this feature maybe, or make it more flexible than the other wave sequencing engine. So what was your primary targets on there?
I think the best way to put it is that it's wave sequencing deconstructed. So it's really kind of shattered and rebuilt from the ground up. So with many people may be familiar with wave sequencing, but the basic idea of the original wave station and of the wave sequencing in the Oasis and the Kronos was that you had a list of steps, and each of those steps had a sample and a volume and a pitch, and on the Kronos and Oasis a step sequencer value. And those things always played back together. They were always linked together. And so with this, those things are completely unlinked. People may or may not be familiar with 20th century serialism, starting with Schoenberg and then Pierre Boulez. And that music is typically considered to be pretty inaccessible, but we took some of those concepts and made them here, except that they can be controlled in real time and played polyphonically. So the idea is that instead of having a list of steps, each of which has a duration tied to a sample, tied to a volume, tied to a pitch, you have all of these things as separate lanes, or in serial speak, rows. And so that you can have 17 samples and 6 pitches and 7 gate times and 18 shapes, and all of these lists are mixed together, and you can have, in addition to different lengths, of course, you can have different loop start and end points, and so all of these things can interact in really unexpected ways. And I guess I was talking to you about the fact that they're individually really simple and easy to understand systems, but then when you combine them together, they turn into this thing that produces things that you don't expect. And I personally find that very exciting.
So it's thanks to the modern technologies today that these features are possible, right?
It's actually a lot of computation involved because these aren't. Some people think, oh yeah, I get it. The lanes are like individual sequencers, but they're not. So it's best to think that it's a non-real-time process. So you get to the next timing step, right? And timings can either be rhythms or they can be crossfades. And the voicing is pretty much split between those two things. So it's not all boom chicka chicka chicka. But when you get to a new timing step, it first says, okay, let's look at the sample lane. All right, so the sample lane is so many steps long. We're looping between steps 5 and 18, and we're looping back and forth. And so right now it figures, okay, I'm at step 14. And so then it looks at the probability for step 14, because each of these steps in each lane has its own probability that can be modulated. So it looks at the probability, and if it's not 100% or if it's being modulated, it rolls some dice and it says, okay, does it win or lose? And if it loses, it goes to the next sample step and it does the same thing. And so then when it's finally figured out which lane to play for this, which step to play for the sample, then it moves to the pitch and does the same thing. And so it goes through all of the lanes that way, and then finally it's ready to play a step. And of course, all of this stuff has to happen in real time, so it has to happen very quickly. But there's all this calculation that happens, and then bang, it plays a step, and then it does it all again.
How difficult is it to make this huge engine so portable, so open for the people? Because I think an essential part of a good synthesizer is a good interface. How long do you work on this to make it so properly?
We had a number of different ideas for how to put this interface together, and so it was very helpful to have a lot of different people working on it who could look at one prototype and say, that's neat, but how do I do this? And when we took it to the sound developers, so John Bowen and John Lemkuhl of Plugin Guru and Airwave and Peter Schwartz, they all had things to say about how to put things together. We definitely wanted to bring out some of the wave sequencing 2.0 aspects to the front, and so there are these direct controls for loop start and loop end. And I wanted to make it so that the interface was mostly about pressing a button and then the screen would instantly jump to where you needed to be. I didn't want you to have to dig down in many hierarchies, and there are occasions where there's a secondary page, for instance, for the envelopes. There's a secondary page for curvatures, but you don't adjust curvature very often, whereas, if you just want to adjust attack, decay, sustain, and release, there are knobs for all of those right on the front panel. And so the same with wave sequencing. We have, buttons for the lanes on the front panel, so you don't have to do any menu diving. Everything is laid out right in front of you. Similarly, the steps. You can have up to 64 steps in a lane. Often they don't, because you don't need to, because they create these complex things with shorter things. So you have 16 under your fingertips right here, so you don't have to scroll around. You can just press a button and go to the step. So it's that sort of immediacy that we were working on.
We had a little camera shutdown, but now coming back, how difficult was it for you to making an interface very easy? Because I know a good synthesizer is if you have a good interface, an easy to use interface, and not overcrowded with knobs and you doesn't know what you do. So was it an essential part of the development probably, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. So we were lucky to have a lot of very smart people involved in this. So not just my group at Korg R&D, but people at Korg Inc. and our voicing guys, who I'd like to name here, Peter Schwartz and John Lemkuhl of Plugin Guru and John Bowen and Airwave. And all of these people looked at the designs, and we iterated through different ideas and were able to come up with something that worked smoothly for everyone, and that was very important. And another thing which I was talking about was the orientation towards front panel organization, so not diving into menus on the screen, but rather all of the lanes are laid out here, so if I want to adjust samples, I press that. If I want to adjust look through the samples, I do this, I press buttons, as opposed to having to scroll around on a screen. So it's physically oriented. We really wanted to make that happen.
And that's probably also the reason why you had performance macros to make it even more accessible to the people.
Yes, absolutely. So as I was noting before, we've got loop start and loop end that are dedicated knobs for the lanes. But there's all sorts of things that you can do inside a lane, and in some cases you may want to modulate a whole lot of things. And so these the macro knobs really help with that, because these can modulate any number of parameters in any of the layers simultaneously. So that means that you don't have to really know very much about anything with these, but you can just walk up to a sound and twist these knobs, and when you find something you like, you can save it. That's something else that we did that's a little bit new, is that these are macro knobs, but their values are actually parameters. So you can save the sound with them, and you can also modulate the knobs. So if you say, well, this knob does something really cool, but I want to modulate this knob like this, and then this knob like this, and I want to control that from the mod wheel, you can set that up quite easily.
I heard some people said, yeah, why not a bigger one with more keys? Was it your plan to make such a smaller device than the original Wavestation?
We wanted to make something that was accessible in terms of price, and accessible in terms of portability and the ability to fit into modern studio setups. So a lot of people are using things on desktops. This fits nicely next to my bigger controller on my desktop. It can fit in a keyboard setup with lots of other keyboards. I think it's an appropriate size. I understand that there are people who want no keys, and there are people who want more keys. But this, I think, addresses a large part of the market and works quite well.
And of course, you have the joystick.
Yeah.
Expanded also, or you have just put it like the Wavestation in the same context?
I'm sorry. Can you ask the question again?
You have again the joystick,
yes,
and you put it in the same context again,
yes,
as the original Wavestation, right? Or you expanded? It's
expanded. So the vector envelope itself is expanded somewhat in terms of its ability to do tempo-based actions, and there's some deep modulation that you can do with it that you couldn't do before. But its fundamental action is really quite similar, maybe a little bit more similar even to the VS, in that you have A, B, C, D, and if you enable vector volume right here, then the vector envelope is simply fading between A, B, C, and D. But you can also use it as a modulation output for controlling all sorts of other things in the system.
I'm quite surprised that you can hold it so long secret in your labs.
It's what we do.
People who have now a Wavestation, would they see a difference in the sound? Does it sound brighter or more modern? Or
yeah, well, I mean, it will sound brighter because it's operating at 48K as opposed to 32K, so it certainly will sound brighter. This has roughly 1,000 times the sample memory of the original Wavestation. The original Wavestation had 2 megabytes. This has over 2 gigabytes. So the samples are very different. But and there are many things, like there are more modern effects, and you can have many more of them and do much more complex things as far as that goes. You could do much more in terms of modulation. But the biggest thing I would say is that, as I was demonstrating for you, original wave sequences are really neat. They really are. They can throw timbres together in new and different and beautiful ways. I don't want to take anything away from the original Wavestation. It was a groundbreaking thing, and it still does beautiful things. But this can produce these textures which are significantly more organic and non-repetitive and surprising and interactive in a way that the Wavestation could never do. I personally think that's the biggest difference.
I see. It has a lot of love for this instrument in you.
That's true.
You love to talk about it. I'm quite happy to see it again on the market, or as a new further development, not just a clone or a production, but a new idea, like new concept,
Great.
More open. So I'm pretty sure you will also add new features in the future according to user requests and more. Pretty sure.
I could never comment on that sort of thing. I'm sorry. I love our users, and I love to get feedback and to hear what they would like to improve in our instruments, and I also like to hear what they really like in them and don't want changed. But I can never talk about future plans that way. I appreciate the question, though.
Okay, then, big thanks for this little overview in your work of the Wavestation. Big thanks, and a good NAMM show. There are several hours, then it's finally over. Big thanks, and big thanks Brian from Korg for making the camera. Yes, hope it's fine. And big thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you soon in one of the next videos. Thank you.